Welcome to Huff Goes to the Movies. My name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff, and some people know that I love going to the movies. Fast 10 hits theaters on May 19th, and before we get to the 11th installment in the Fast and Furious series, I've decided to revisit all the films leading up to that point. So every week I will be revisiting a new film and reviewing it with a series called Toretto Tuesdays. This is the 5th week of the series now, which means it's the 5th episode, which means it's time to talk about the 5th entry in the franchise, the Citizen Kane of the Fast and Furious series. I'm, of course, talking about Fast 5. And I think for many people, Fast 5 sort of represents the mountaintop for these films. This is really the film that I think really brought all the different elements together and really fired on all cylinders, no pun intended. This was a massive crossover event for the series, and while this isn't like the MCU where each of these characters were in their own standalone films and they were just suddenly being rushed together, this was a true sequel to the film that preceded it. At the end of Fast 4, Fast and Furious, Dominic Toretto, despite taking down this big-time drug dealer, is sentenced to life in prison. So Brian, Mia, Leo, and Santos, they stage this absurd car crash to try to get him out, and they then go on the run through Central and South America until they end up in Rio, Brazil. At that point, they are on the run, but they are still needing to pull off different heists in order to make ends meet. And at that point, they decide that they will pull off a massive heist against the big boss of Rio, the favelas, whatever. And of course, while trying to stage this massive heist, they find themselves on the wanted list from several different agencies in the US who have deployed the services of Hobbs. That's right, The Rock. Going into this movie, I think that this was before Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson started to be taken seriously as a movie star. Yes, he was already a star from his time in professional wrestling. People liked The Rock. I think people sort of expected him to perform well in action movies, but this was like the first time that I think putting him in a movie very much proved to be the right idea for a proven franchise. Fast and Furious didn't receive great reviews, but it was the highest grossing film in the series up until this came out. And when you combine the fact that they started bringing in characters from the previous installments, I think that it made this one feel a bit more special. There's a lot of reasons why I think that's completely justified. Director Justin Lin, this was his third at-bat with the series. Writer Chris Morgan, this was also his third attempt at working in the series. And as much as I liked the Fast and Furious Tokyo Drift, I think that Fast and Furious felt like such a tonal shift relative to all the films that preceded it. I think that Fast and Furious does a really good job of continuing the threads from the very first film. It's great to have the original cast back, but that's a film that doesn't quite strike the right tone given what these films had been. But I think that Fast 5 does a great job of just continuing that story, but putting it with the tone and the sensibility that I think has made these films so endearing. So yes, there is the drama of Dom, Brian, Mia being on the run. There is sort of this melodramatic element of what this means for their family and their life circumstances. But more importantly, this film really embraces something that has always worked in these films, and that is the characters. And sure, they may not be as well developed as the Avengers in their film, but Justin Lin allowed for these actors to really sew their personalities into these roles. So something that I mentioned in my review of Too Fast, Too Furious is that Tyrese in that film as Roman Pierce, he's a pretty different character from how he is now in this era of the franchise. And you can see that starting here in Fast 5, where he becomes much more of the comic relief. He's certainly able to play off of Ludacris's character a lot better, as well as Paul Walker's. I think that the way that Justin Lin handled this ensemble actually is pretty genius. He finds the right pairings of these characters and he makes sure that they go on these different side quests together. And I think this plays out best when it comes to the budding romance between Han and Giselle. Sung Kang, coming out of Tokyo Drift, really became one of the immediate fan favorites of the series. I think that's why Justin Lin decided to use Fast and Furious as a way to sort of circle back in time a bit and mess with the chronological order of the films. To have him around, I think, is a real treat. It's a real compliment to some of these other characters. And I think that Sung Kang as a performer just provides a really good balance to Tyrese, Ludacris, and even Vin Diesel. So to pair him with Giselle, a character that I think probably didn't quite get her due in the previous film, I think that it makes both of them much more endearing. And I think that it provides a sense of place for both of them when it comes to the grand scheme of the crew. Leo and Santos are sort of relegated to comic relief and dirty work, but I think they work well here, especially considering that in real life, they are probably the biggest stars in the movie, at least at that point in time. So I think that the way they're utilized here is the right choice. And obviously the Too Fast, Too Furious crew, Brian, Tej, Roman, having them paired together works really well too. I think that the movie's levity really does come to life with the additions that they provide. And yes, this film does actually tie even further back to the events of the first film. It brings back Vince, a character who you might have forgotten about if you hadn't watched the first film in a while, but the way they utilize him here and the sense of drama that he brings when it comes to calling out Dom for what his decisions have meant for their family, I actually think that works really well. And none of this even gets into just how great Dwayne Johnson is in this role. The character of Hobbs has become more ingratiated with the crew over the next few films, and because of personal beef between The Rock and Vin Diesel in real life, Hobbs is no longer a part of the series, but I think that as an antagonist, he works really well here. He provides a perfect foil for Vin Diesel. And I think that The Rock's charisma and bravado is something that is different from what Vin Diesel is able to provide, but there is a balance there that I think Justin Lin was able to find. And so any of the scenes that sort of showed them going head to head, including their big fight that happens in the third act, I think that that works really well here. And I think that it raises the stakes for the plot of this film, because while all of that is going on, there is still this massive heist that they need to try and pull off. And when the film is channeling its Ocean's 11, I think that it works out pretty well. I think that the characters here have so much personality and there's so much history that's established from where they've come in the previous films that it really does make a nice change of pace for these movies. And I love the fact that this movie is fun. Fast and Furious, because of things that happen to some of those characters, it's a little too serious, it's a little too moody and somber. But with this film, those somber moments are there, but they're used in moderation. And I think that when you balance that out with some of the more get the gang together, plan out the heist, pull off the heist, I think that the balance here is something that is the perfect tone for what these movies should be. Fast 5 is proof that if the third time's not the charm, if the fourth time's not the charm, then maybe the fifth time can be the charm. Because I think that this is the film that if the previous films never hooked you, I think this is the type of film that can make you care about these characters. And while I don't know that it makes the previous films better in retrospect, I think that this is absolutely proof that when a filmmaker is paired with the right material and when they're allowed to grow with it and evolve with it, that some really special things can happen. Because I think that Fast 5 is one of those movies that is sort of a benchmark for how franchises should progress. This film came out 1 year before Marvel put out The Avengers. And again, while this film didn't have the same setup as The Avengers, I think that this movie being such a massive jump from the films that preceded it and sort of launching the series into this tentpole stratosphere. To me, I think that Fast Five is one of those movies that studio heads need to be looking at. Yes, everyone wants the success of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the success of the first Avengers making over $1 billion and sort of spearheading another dozen films to flirt with that mark as well, all the way up to Infinity War and Endgame, crossing the $2 billion mark. That's impressive. And anyone who is running a business wants to do things that are going to make them the most amount of money. But when you look at the approach that the Fast and Furious franchise took in taking some films that were not all together that connected, and then finding ways to retool those characters, retool those storylines into something that could start to run for the long game, I think the Fast Five is like a crown jewel when it comes to franchise reinvention. The first film in this series is about a cop going undercover to infiltrate the world of illegal street racing. In this film, we don't see an illegal street race take place. The fact that the film was able to have so much success despite it not really hearkening back to the roots of this series is a testament to the fact that the filmmaking here has really stepped up. The characters here feel much more realized. There's much more balance with the tone, and they really did put these characters in sort of a perfect setup to allow them to utilize their different skill sets, to lean into their personality quirks, and it allowed them to have as much fun as possible. Fast Five probably could have been the final film in the series, and I think all of us would have probably been like, yeah, Fast and Furious is the best. But the fact that they allowed this franchise to continue from here and that the stunts only got bigger and the characters became even more endearing, I mean, I gotta give it up. I think that Justin Lin does not get enough credit for his contributions to this franchise. The same goes for Chris Morgan. And when it comes to this cast, I think that if you go back and watch the first two films, you can probably offer some critiques about the performances, especially from Paul Walker. But I love the fact that as this franchise continued, he appeared to be getting more comfortable in this role. And by the time you get to Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, and Furious 7, he really does feel like a natural for this part. I think that is a credit to all parties involved. I think The Fast 5 is a great movie. I think that it is a perfect summer blockbuster. I remember going to see it and I couldn't get enough of it. Now, unfortunately, I did not get to keep going back to the theater to see it that summer because I was doing a lot of traveling, but that's neither here nor there because after revisiting it this past week, I'm convinced. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. I think The Fast Five is a perfect movie, and because I like rating things, I would rate it 5 out of 5 stars. I could talk about this movie forever. There's so much that I enjoy. I did not even get into the insane heist that sees our characters dragging a bank vault through the streets of Rio. It looks ridiculous and dangerous, and they clearly have no regard for people's property, but we don't need to get into all of that because this franchise only got more insane from here. But I will say, of all the movies of this era of the Fast franchise, I appreciate the fact that while this movie certainly flirts with absurdity and things that look ridiculous and maybe unrealistic, I appreciate the fact that Dominic Toretto is not a superhero yet. The characters still feel human and vulnerable, like they could actually get hurt. That's something that I think this franchise needs to try and dial back to. But I will get into more of that as this franchise goes into more absurd heights in later videos. What are your thoughts on Fast 5? How do you rank it with the rest of the series? Join me in the comments and let me know. And also, have you been revisiting these films with me? I would love to hear from people who are fans of this franchise like myself. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. That certainly helps. If you haven't already, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. That way you can stay up to date on everything that I've got going on here. My name is Eric Huffman II. Most people call me Huff. Salute me familia. I'll see you at the movies. Peace.